I'm very happy to be in discussion with Craig and Alper, because I think that there are two very good authors to act that are able to bring on the discussion about the key argument of today, which is public spaces for communities. It's very interesting because for the first time in human history,
Ben yok muyum? Ben niye şeyim?
Hello.
Better if somebody mute. You should mute your microphone. Instead, we'll enter in different rooms, as they say. Okay, may I talk again?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Please go ahead.
this is the online situation is always like that. So I'm saying that what is very interesting that we all experience the same kind of weird and dramatic situation, because has never happened in the human history. More than 5 billion people has been locked down at the same moment in their house, and watching out at the empty streets, the empty squares, and it was an amazing situation, because if you have to imagine that in the last 2 months, billions of people has been locked down and connected socially. So it was an amazing situation, because on one side we have been obliged to stay home, so we have been separated by our natural playground, by our natural environment, which is the city, and so we lived in our domestic cage. But in the meantime, all the billions of people has been let's say socially connected through internet, to the social media, which was another amazing experience, because everybody was posting images and sharing experiences, witnessing the situation of being locked down. So, and this is the first argument, but most of all, what we are today discussing, what we are trying to reflect, is the fact that probably the idea of living the public spaces as usual, as something normal, will be under strong pressure, will be under strong changes. The fear of the virus, the fear of the others. You walk in the street, you don't feel anymore only free, but you feel free, and in the meantime afraid of the people you are crossing, because you don't know who's bringing the virus or not. So, and this will be affecting a lot all the natural environment of the public life, from school to museums, from workspaces to restaurant, any place we are used to live together will be somehow affected by the fear and regulations, let's say. We have something in a way similar to say how an event that could be effective on public space, which is 9/11. Before 9/11, there was no restriction, no idea of what does means security and safety in public spaces. After 9/11, every international competition, every project has inside its DNA regulation related to security and to safety as part of it. So if 9/11 in a way generated this kind of effect, you have to imagine which kind of effect will have the lockdown of 5-6 billion people everywhere in the world on the changing idea of what will be a public space for fluid communities. No? So the idea of this meeting or this webinar is to involve two designers which has been used to work on public spaces. Craig Copeland is a partner of Pelli Architects, which is a company, which is an architectural studio, which has been devoted to design public space in the last 50 years. We all know a lot of projects where the idea of the square, the galleria, the public spaces has been DNA, the basics of urban development, of urban projects. No? And on the other side, Alper Derinboğaz'ın, which is younger, his office Silkar-AKDO that has been funded by him, devoted a lot of research and project on new public spaces, like the new Museum of Istanbul and other works he developed in the last years, where the idea of communities and the idea of architecture has been in a way which has been influencing one each other. So I'm asking both of you to present some of your work. So I would say, let's start from your experiences before COVID. So your philosophy of work in relation to the idea of public space in your research and your work. And then we can switch from pre-COVID to post-COVID to have a broader discussion about what should be a public space for our cities in the next years, how it will be influencing the situation we are living, and how a designer can intervene to avoid the idea that a public space is dead. Because a lot of people say probably this epidemic situation will affect the idea of the city itself. I don't think so. I think that probably we will start defining spaces in a completely different way, but still considering communities at the center. No? But this is something that is very interesting to discuss from our point of view, which is the point of view of designers as you and the theoretical people like me, no? Working on the idea of reality, working on the idea of community in a completely experimental and visionary way. So I leave the word, I would say, let's start from the farthest person, which is Craig. Good morning, Craig. You are in the morning, so you are in New York. So like me, you know, I'm in Milano, which is after China, the second place for the strongest and most violent effect of the epidemic. And Craig, unfortunately, is living in the third one. So we can start from your experience, from the design point of view, and then we will switch to Alper, and then we go back to New York, Istanbul, and Milano as a place to discuss about the idea of public spaces.
Great. I'm going to ask to share the screen. Thank you, Luca, and Alper, and Erdogan, and everyone for being here.
Yes, you can share, Craig.
Okay. All right, I'm going to show a few images. First of all, of my home, which is New York City, New York State, and then three different projects very, very quickly that speak to our approach at Pelli Clark Pelli to public place, and very much in line with this theme of community. And I want to first of all say that this is wonderful to be back together with Luca and Alper. In 2018 in Verona, Luca was the curator for an exhibition called Soul of City, which in some respects shares some of the, I think, some of the underlying DNA and qualities. We were focused on how to express stone, or how stone could express or support the soul of city. And perhaps it was destiny that Alper and I would have our two exhibits side by side. So it was the start of a very nice friendship, and I'm glad that we're all together again today. So I start with the picture of Central Park, which is often described as the lung as well as the heart of New York City. And today it is definitely serving that purpose. I personally have not been in Manhattan but once since the beginning of March, and I was very close to Central Park. And it is today, as it has been and will be, I think, beyond COVID, a very central part of our community, the urban community of New York City. Another part of our community is Grand Central Station, and this is the main concourse. This is the way that I arrive into Manhattan every day from where I live in New Rochelle, which New Rochelle was actually one of the epicenters of the first COVID cases here in New York State. But this is a very vibrant space. It's a nexus, and there are different communities. There's a transitory community, but there's also, you can see on the periphery, there are these opportunities for people to collect and gather. People meet each other, people pass through. It's very much in the spirit of what community is about. And then jumping to the other aspect of New York, going from the community as a room to the community of the skyline. And this is actually a superimposed projection of future projects in New York. This is actually one of our projects here. There's another one over here. And this is to say that a lot of people think of New York City as the skyline, and it is very much a part of New York City. And this is going to continue to be part of the future of New York City. But another part of New York City could be seen as the way that we take infrastructure and reuse that infrastructure. And this is an aerial shot of the High Line, which has been highly successful and is now, it's not a new concept, but it's a revived concept of taking infrastructure and embracing communal spaces. In this case, it's a 1.5 mile network, or actually I think it's longer than that, maybe 2 miles long network that goes from the meatpacking district on the west side of Manhattan all the way up to the Hudson Yards. But further down in Manhattan is a project that was a very early project for our firm in the late 70s, and that's the World Financial Center, which Cesar Pelli described it as the foothills to the mountains, the mountains being the World Trade Center. And I think this is poignant on a number of cases. The way that the project was conceived, and it was an international competition that we won, was that the Winter Garden would be the heart and the collecting point, and really the communal point, not only for the complex, the 8 million square foot complex, but also for all of Lower Manhattan. And it gives you a connection to the river, to the Hudson River. This was the reality back then. There was the West Side Highway, and the only way you could get there safely was across these pedestrian bridges. And this was the condition before 9/11. So this was the main bridge that came across, and this came to the Winter Garden space. And this particular bridge on 9/11 was right where the North Tower landed. And obviously this was first and foremost one of the most tragic events perhaps for New York City. And the aftermath of that and our response, I think, has many lessons, not specifically, but in general, that we should take into account as we're considering our present circumstance and how we respond. Our response was not to build a fort. Our response was to really to, in the spirit of what we're talking about today, was to reinforce the sense of community and go from what had been this access of a bridge over a highway to an access at street level, and an access that would be very open and transparent looking back to the World Trade Center site. And then to lighten and brighten everything within the Winter Garden, which is the arrival point continuing today. And just beyond that, to the marina, which is connected to this, is just an example of how creating these kinds of places creates the opportunities for spontaneity. Now, I know we're going to be talking about this in a minute, but how do we transition in this time where social distancing is a very big part of what we need to do today? That's something I'd like to talk about later. A different project, which is very close to Luca, is our Porta Nuova master plan and Unicredito tower. And this was also a response to another tragic event. There was a bombing that occurred in World War II, and a very large portion between two of the major train stations remained undeveloped, partly because no one knew how to approach such a large-scale area comprehensively. We were approached by Heinz developers to help conceive of a master plan to create a new Porta Nuova, a new city center. This is the master plan. Everything you see that's colored was part of our master plan. And you can see that there's this central circular space, which was fundamental. And like the winter garden you saw a minute ago, this was the idea of creating a central communal space. This is a Google map today. And these are different approaches to the site from the train station. And then this is that central plaza, which has these skylit openings that take you down to some of the lower levels. And it really is conceived as something that should be experienced as a citizen of Milan, and it's encouraged to be this very open and flowing space, and also a very playful space. And then the third project that I wanted to show is even more recent project. This has been recently completed. This is Transbay and Salesforce Tower, which is an elevated green space, but it's really a transit hub. And it's this idea of a vertical community that is also extending out beyond that vertical. This is a cross-section through this over 4-block long structure that has below-grade connections to a number of different transit systems and a future high-speed rail system. And then above there's a bus depot, and then at the very top, this opportunity to connect to nature, very much in the spirit of the High Line that I showed you a little bit earlier. At the street level, it's meant to be transparent, open, and also intriguing and inviting with architectural articulations that satisfy both this sense of enclosure, but also transparency and wonder. And then the top is meant to be a very open and accessible space. This was actually the opening day. It's a very popular place for people to go and get an elevated view of the city, but also to be out in the open. And then this is the context of that space relative to the Transbay, to the Salesforce Tower, which is going back to the earlier photo I showed you of New York City. It's a different part of the experience of community in San Francisco, and that's the skyline. And with that, I will hand it back to Luca, and we can expand on some of these thoughts.
Well, what Craig shows, I think it's very interesting and bring us directly to the core of the argument. What I always like about picture you show that there was images of architecture, but with people, with the densified communities, no? And immediately, looking at the images, you ask yourself how it will be in the next months, in the next years. Will it be possible to get back again to the densified use of such public spaces? But before going back to this kind of discussion with you and Alper, and I like to highlight two keywords that you have been using oftenly. Well, let's say three words. One is community. There's no urban space without a real community of people. And then you have been using two keywords, which is revitalization and reinforce, which means working through architecture to give a new identity to the spaces where a different kind of large community can be allowed. And this, for me, is the basics of the urban design and contemporary architecture. Alper, would you share with us your project about the same argument? So it would be very interesting to cross this kind of experiences together.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, like Craig was talking about where we crossed our story with Luca even before that in Venice Biennale in 2014. These events, also Verona, where we came together with Craig and in the curatorship of Luca, I think that was also kind of a different thing, which kind of creates communities that precedes spaces. So it's not a space, but still the notion of the community is there. So I think it's very, very nice to remember those days. And remembering this always reminds us that things actually, spaces actually may be meaningful when they are compared with when they are connected with the events and those kind of things. So the human interaction actually makes it give the importance of the stuff. So I like to share a couple of things within our story. Like I said, where we met with Luca was his editorial contribution to 2014 Venice Biennale exhibition of Turkey for the first time, and where we wanted to look was the autonomous structure of the community. So Istanbul is a city. We propose that Istanbul is a city that doesn't design itself, but it kind of interacts with the geographical conditions and responds to that. So the community actually develops its space by itself somehow, but in a relationship with the ownership, with the geography and stuff. So we gave an example of Büyükdere, which is the new financial center somehow, as opposed to the center designated in Ataşehir, which didn't work very well at the end, but this is self-made and it is kind of working. So we wanted to emphasize that, and we wanted to say how important it is to understand the community's inclinations within the city. So this may be one of the first cases that we looked the subject in depth and carried into kind of maps that's showing the neighborhoods of the community, the scale of neighborhoods, the scale of the city, and the infrastructure and geography, and then how they relate to each other. And this is a picture from that. This kind of years later, this kind of translated into a different collaboration, which is Istanbul City Museum, which is under construction since 2016. And it has been a very, very long journey, like any museums, any interesting museums in the world, I guess, comparing to, we cannot compare it to a private commercial building story. So it's been in development since 2016. And what we wanted to achieve here was, it is near Topkapı, it's near the urban land walls. We thought the museum, beyond being an exhibition space, museum is a place that people come together. So we wanted to create different scenarios of people coming together. We developed kind of a courtyard in the middle of the museum. So it's a place that actually people, if you are talking about the city of the museum of the city in Istanbul, then we are actually talking about the people. It's people's museum, and then we seek for a situation where people come together and interact with each other. So we developed this kind of courtyard for that mission. We developed kind of a rooftop again for the same mission, and also we kind of developed a museum that interacts with the park around it. So it is actually, sorry, my slides are a little too fast. So underneath the park, it is all connected to whole space, so it becomes one with the city. Different variations of the space that inspires people to come together, and we really thought we really try to engage that idea into design, and we try to engage also the communities that's beyond our time. So this is a wall from Byzantine period, and you can see the stains, you can see the different traces on top of each other. So there are the bricks from Byzantine, there are bricks from Ottoman time. So it's a combination of many different cultures. And we wanted to see how we can relate to these different communities of different times. When we are talking about when we are talking about Istanbul, people tend to divide, like, what is Turkish, what's Byzantine, what is Ottoman, and these kind of things. But this is fictional categories, whereas we could also look at it as a unification of different cultures and how they interact with each other. So this wall, we thought, symbolizes it in a very, very important level, and we try to carry it into the museum. So we will see in the facade the implications of this wall once it is completed, and this one moment from the construction. Another project that we looked at the communities in a different way is Eggman Structures. So we could say Istanbul City Museum is trying to find a way to interact with different communities from different times, and then also the people of the time, people of now, of course, of the city. And Eggman Structures project on the Yapı KATALOÐU Culture Center, where we work with supervisionary people, including Tülay Güngen in the management, and we came up with this idea that we could actually make a frame and make a window in front of the building. So this window looks into a much deeper, much overlaid kind of visual content. So it is almost like a window in the city, looking to a different dimension. So we obviously worked a lot about the fabrication of the process, and we kind of turned it into a dynamic facade together with visual overlay. So the physical and visual comes together to create more depth in the space, in essence. And looking at another project in Istiklal Street, different version of the project, of the idea, which is called Fitaş Passage. Many of you know Fitaş Passage, sinemalar, movies, and all that. I think everybody remembers, one of the most interesting passages in the history of Istiklal. But it was not a historic passage. It is a modern building together with a lot of different times overlapped into the same building. So it was a kind of very diverse structure in many ways. and it was about to die because of the condition of movies now. And we tried to come up with an idea to imagine the whole passage. So we thought this white space in the ground floor shows a connection to the back street. So we thought maybe we could bring back the passage idea into the building and make it live again. And we also wanted to, in the facade, we also wanted to bring back this kind of three-dimensional feeling into building. So it would be not flat windows, touristic windows, touristic shopping windows, but it is more of a three-dimensional space where you can interact, where you can go up to the balcony in the first floor, take a look at the street from a different level where you can't, you don't have the chance in other parts. You can also stroll in the street and see how does it interact with the whole street. And also when you are inside the building, you can look at the street in different angles, in different specified angles. And there's a shot from the balcony, which we very like. This is a public space, and we hope this is gonna inspire some other perception of the city, of the street. So this is pretty much that. These are like 3 different layers of how we look at the communities and how we try to interact with the community, obviously. You are in silent, I guess, Luca.
You're muted.
Luca is trying to be unsilenced. Yes,
there he is.
You are now
okay. Sorry. There was a problem of link. Thank you so much, Alper. Well, I think it's very interesting. I was wondering, looking at your beautiful images of both of you, that Istanbul and New York are 2 megalopolis and 2 cities based on communities, not only on a single community, but on the communities. Both of the cities are product of different communities that has been overlaying along centuries. Sure, Istanbul is older, much older, but both cities are based on the fact that people coming from different countries has arrived there, living there, and generating the city along time. No? So the idea of communities and the idea of density are totally part of Istanbul and New York on a completely different, let's say, point of view, but they share those 2 amazing elements. And my point is, my first question would be for you: how did you leave the city from your window? I know that you are both not living in the centers. So Craig is living in La Rochelle, New Rochelle, and you are living on the Asian side. So far from the so-called center of the city. But which has been your experience of the city under lockdown? No? How did you experience the idea that your city, which has been always, I mean, we spent a lot of time in New York and Istanbul always complaining about traffic jam and being late for that. Suddenly, the streets, the squares has been empty. No? I remember 2 months ago, while walking in the street in Milano, I was really walking in the middle of the street because there were no cars. And was such an incredible experience because somehow the space which was considered dangerous for a pedestrian became the place where you can easily walk. And I saw situations where people were really using the street in a completely opposite way as we are used to. So first of all, I would like to ask you, how did you experience the images and even by yourself of the city where you have been living during the lockdown, and which kind of impression they gave it to you?
Well, yeah, from as you say, Luca, I live now in
Craig, I don't see you. Do you see me?
Yeah, I see you.
Ah, okay, good. I don't see you. Okay.
No. Do you see me, Alper?
I see you because Craig has two profiles in the connection.
Ah,
so
okay.
one is without view, one is with the view.
Ah, okay. See, now I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So you are double.
One's my voice, one's my face.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So.
It's an interesting question you're asking, Luca, because I think the connective tissue in this moment is exactly what's happening today. This idea of the internet and the experience. We say virtual, but I don't know if that's completely accurate, because we have the sound and we have the visuals in real time. We're not in the place physically, but mentally we're there. And we are, as you were mentioning before, there's this kind of paradox of community that's a different kind of community. We're in some respects more connected. I think it would have been harder for us to get together to have this kind of a discussion in more typical times. We would be very busy with everything. So, you know, I would say that the biggest thing for me is it's kind of a surprise to me at how quickly, at least in the design world, I can't speak for fabrication world like in the case of Silkar, but at least in the design world, how adaptive we were able to make those transitions. I would say that the biggest change beyond profession in our office is kind of the family and the community of family. And in our case, I have a wife and 2 kids and a dog, mm-hmm. and we've spent a lot of time together. And our community has been redefined in that regard, based upon a different kind of daily routine. And the places that we would have gone to before COVID and the places we'll probably go are different. Right now, our big communal interchange is when we go to get food and we go to a market, and we're not interacting with people, we're interacting with things. The main time that we're interacting with people, again, is not when we're physically in the same place. So that's a kind of weird juxtaposition.
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Alper?
Yeah, I mean,
you're Istanbul under lockdown.
I don't feel too bad about it. I mean, expect all the people, you know, like the health problems and situation. That's a terrible situation. But I think Istanbul has been unbearable for a very long time in terms of the traffic, the density and stuff. So it is kind of so it is it's not too bad. And I started to feel like we generate too much generate too much communication, but we actually don't generate too many things to communicate. As the world became more faster, as we can travel much easier and stuff. Now we cannot travel, so we can focus on certain things in a larger chunk of time, and then we actually can create things that we can really talk about or communicate about. So that's maybe one nice side of the situation. I cannot call it nice. I know it's completely horrifying for a lot of people, but this is maybe what we should have experienced at some point. So I'm trying to look at it in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but this is what we mostly all lived. Let's say the part of well, we are part of the lucky part of the lockdown, because
yeah.
We have the chance to have a safe home and to live, to work on smart working, considering the fact that in the streets there were people that were in a way obliged to walk in the street and to deliver food to us that are locked down in the house. So let's say probably the what we are living today is a stronger social differences, because COVID generated a very strong comprehension of the social differentiations, I think, very strong. I mean, the people who can do it or they can't, you know, and this is something very, very clear. And this also would give a completely different sense and value to the idea of public and community spaces in the next future. Because now I would like to enter with you, since the time is running, in one of the key arguments. No, as Craig said before, how do we transition social distancing? And I would prefer to switch from the idea of social distance to the idea of physical distance, because social distance, I think, is a very dangerous word, because it makes a difference between poor and rich, smart and unsmart. I mean, I think the problem today is physical distance, not social distance. So this is a very slippery word, and it's very interesting how this word enter in our daily vocabulary. So I would like to propose to use physical distance instead of social. And because on one side, we will, as a designer, we have to work on the idea how to, let's say, to work on public spaces, considering social distance, considering physical distance as an argument, no? Which is a paradox, because usually a square, a museum, a plaza, all the spaces you show us are based on communities and density, you know? So how can you imagine the same space with half of the people? And which will be that half of the people? Because then the point is who will be allowed to use the space? Because and this is very social. This is very political in a way, no? On the other,
well, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting in New York City, and I'm sure this is being considered elsewhere, in order to deal with the physical distance challenges, but also the density. And this is going to be an experiment. We maybe have a conversation in another 3 months to talk about how it's going, but our mayor is restricting certain streets completely from traffic, and it's yeah, I think it's probably happening in many places. And so what it's doing is it's redefining what the public realm is. And I think that as architects thinking about this moment and projecting forward, it's important to understand more than ever. And I think that, you know, definitely in Italy, there's a very strong tradition of this, of thinking of designing part of that public realm, the facade. And it's great looking at Alper's passage. I think it's a good example. We're creating this public realm, even when we might be asked by a client to look, you know, specifically, almost like a silo at a specific building. We have a responsibility to create this this part of the community, which today, in this particular moment, is especially important, given that how those facades have a certain amount of porosity that allows interaction. Like, for instance, I was, as I said, I was in Manhattan for the first time in almost 3 months. I went to the Upper West Side, and that's a very predominantly, you know, there's a lot of residences, there's a lot of restaurants along Amsterdam, and there was a whole zone that was being created that was kind of the delivery pickup zone, that was normally occupied by people sitting and waiting, but it's being redefined. And I think that it's important as for us to think about how we design cities, architecture that supports cities that are adaptable. And I think this is a case in point where we're seeing that adaptation of taking what was once occupied or will, you know, probably go back in some respects as a vehicular passage and making that into a pedestrian passage. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a decision by cities around the world. We don't need as many streets. Maybe it's good to have more of these public boulevards. And maybe, to your point, Luca, that makes it more accessible to a greater public.
Well, yeah, that's clear. I mean, even in Milan, I mean, as in New York, they are working on the section of the street, let's say. So they are reducing the place where the cars are allowed to move, giving more place to bicycle, for example, which in a way is it's a possibility to push people using bicycle instead of cars, because one of the reaction of the situation today is that people are so afraid to use public transports that they are all going back to cars, which is the nightmare possible.
Yeah.
The years of working on a policy of public transports, now the subway is mainly empty. This morning I was in the subway for a very fast trip, and there was really no one in the subway in the peak time, which means that the people that are moving are mainly in the car, private car, which means one car, one people, which is the worst case scenario possible in terms of pollution, in terms of quality of life. So this is, I think it's a very dangerous reaction to the situation of today, for example. But in the meantime, it's true that working on public spaces means working on the way we are using them. And I think it's also working with the idea how to design the different use of time we will spend in our space. I mean, we get used to queue now, no? We queue for everything because everything is slowed down to enter everywhere. From the bakery to the supermarket to any place, you have to queue. And everybody gets used to immediately. So, but the time of queuing is a time which is very interesting. It's a time which in a way slow down your life somehow, because we will do half of the things we are used to do in the same day. So this relationship between space and time will be, it's very interesting how it will change. And the way architecture will design our time of waiting, it's also very interesting in terms of spatiality, physicality of the space. Alper,
yeah, time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely interesting way of looking at the time and the city relationship. I'm curious to see how it's gonna affect our cities. And I also remember, like, maybe it's nice to mention that our collaboration with Luca is going back to 2014, but during the curatorial design of Istanbul City Museum and other situations where we crossed in Verona and other things, it was a privilege to visit Italian cities together with Luca and see the streetscape, how it is designed for pedestrians. Hearing it from a architectural historian and theoretical background, it was very impressive. And it really moved me in couple of times, like how the Italian city is designed for pedestrians, actually, like how you look at the square, how you perceive the square, how the building contributes into square. This is all laid out and designed by the time. And together with the cars, I think we have been completely ignorant in a lot of cases, like the relationship on the street, the relationship of the facades into the streets, and these kind of things, because the car is a very crude vehicle, actually. So maybe going back to understanding more detailed way, in a detailed way, how the pedestrians interact with how the people actually interact with the buildings, I was thinking could be very interesting. I don't know how serious we can take it as designers, but I think this is definitely something we should think about. Maybe it's a repetition of what you already mentioned, but I thought it is very important to bring it
I,
up.
I understand what you mean. Working on the section of the streets is one of the ways. No one invent a solution from day zero to day one. It will be very important to see how people will interact with the spaces and how good design can allow a better quality of life. Because, you know, the point for us will be still designing spaces for communities that are looking to stay together, not to use the city as it was before. I don't see any apocalyptic vision where the city will be empty and the people will be locked down in their houses, just working and living and eating, doing everything there in the lockdown in house. But I'm sure that something will change, and I think it will be very interesting for all of us to observe, to listen, to observe, to see how people will be used differently by people, and to find ways to design the cities differently and properly. Craig, from your point of view, I think, Clark Perry is an office which has really devoted most of the last decades on revitalizing spaces, giving quality to different communities in relation to spaces that has been considered abandoned because there were not solutions, apparently solutions. So, and this has been changing along decades, how do you think that, and you have a lot of projects under construction today, which is, I mean, Salesforce, for example, is under construction. You have Boston, you have other cities where you are really working on a huge hub that are infrastructural, physical, and communitarian hub. How do you think the situation we are living today will somehow affect the evolution or possible changes? I mean, what can be, how do you see this kind of wave, or epidemic wave on the project you are delivering this moment?
Yeah, this is the core of our discussions the last couple months with our clients.
Can imagine.
The idea you bring up, and Alper built on that. I think it's really fascinating, this idea, the scale of time. Because I think that if you think about the scale of time for a child versus the scale of time of an adult who's just racing, the importance of detail changes. You as an adult, we tend to look at things abstractly. We want the bullet points. We don't want to have too much detail. I think that one of the things that we're finding is that we're approaching those interstitial spaces, like whether it's the facade, the way that you interact between the public and the private realm, those transitions, just like you said, the queue area, just like after 9/11, the response with security transformed the way that, especially in New York City, the way office buildings are entered, the way that airports are entered. I think that we're going to see a similar thing where not so much that we're going to have more queue space, but we're going to have more open space for people to transition and figure out where they're penetrating from one space outside to inside. And we're already looking at ways to allow for that larger space. One we talked about a moment ago, and that's allowing the sidewalk and the public realm to be bigger. So that there's breathing room. You give room for people to move. And again, I like this concept, scale of time, because by giving more space, people aren't compressed and pushed through something. There's a chance for people to wander and move more slowly, which is more of an Italian tradition, especially in the hill towns and smaller towns where there are no cars that are even allowed inside some of those centers, and it allows the pedestrians to really occupy that space. But I don't think we need to transform our cities and get rid of cars altogether. But I think one precedent in New York is the whole transformation of Broadway. Yeah. There was a study done by Gale that ended up first being like a trial. Let's put in these temporary, just with paint. Let's temporarily see what would happen if we changed the city streets and made them smaller and allowed the awkwardness of all those diagonals going through Manhattan to become occupiable. And it's been a huge success. And I would imagine that that's something that may come out of this that is actually a positive in this otherwise not so positive moment.
Well, I completely agree. It's what I call the onion strategy. Onion has a different layers, and
right.
It's the transition layers, which are the more external ones, will have more physicality in a way, and they will be the way to protect the inside from outside, but without generating a strong separation. No? So it's a kind of rooms of and this will be very interesting, because how we will design those transition rooms. They cannot be like an hospital. No, they will be also part of a kind of experience we do. No, so since we are waiting the time to do something, those rooms will be a chance to invent something for us to have an experience of transition. So this and this is still working on the idea of the section of the city, which is related to that. Before going to Alper, there's a question from Dennis. Say, do you think from now on an epidemic-resistant architecture or an epidemic-resistant urban design can be created that can be applied worldwide, or every city has to find their own way to find a suitable solution for this? Which I think it's a clever question. It's like a answer. It's like from global to local, not as usual. And
I mean, even in New York City, the way that the neighborhoods react is different. I think that
from one neighbor to another, I agree. With you. Probably there will be some kind of a general strategies that will be shared from cities, but then the culture, the communities, the climate, the section of the city will generate an alternative solution. This would allow probably an amazing potential worldwide workshop for cities to
Exactly. I mean, I think this is an incredible opportunity to look at how urban design in real time happens. That there are going to be all kinds of people aren't going to see them as experiments. They're going to see it as moving on with life, and they're going to be very inventive and creative, and what will resonate will be shared by other communities. And because of the fluidity of information, I think there'll be a lot of very clever, interesting strategies that I think will permeate and have a more lasting impact on urban design.
I agree with you. Because it's related to big numbers. Alper, what do you think about this argument? I mean, it's so much related also to what you're working on. For example, just going from one bigger scale to a smaller scale, how do you think this situation will affect our museum in Istanbul? I mean, how do you? I mean, the museum has a beautiful courtyard. There's a very clear path. So I mean, the circulation is very clever. It's pre-COVID, post-COVID, I would say. But how do you think that people would leave your building when it will be finally open?
I think it is, thank you for the question. I think it's a very important moment to think about it, because it's still in progress in a way. So how the museums are going to change worldwide is a big question, I think. Because this is all about people coming together. I mean, you could go online and look up stuff by your own, and we call it internet and Wikipedia. And this is, everybody can create their own music and digital RAM. But physically coming together is some way gonna be more luxurious, hopefully. So it hopefully is going to also reflect to the public spaces, because you cannot over the centuries we have been more minimalistic about the space that we can let people use. In a lot of cases we switched to open offices. We don't use the same floor plans as before, so we switched to open offices. We looked into more condensed versions and stuff, so we are always being on the profit side, whereas now we have to be more evenly distributed, we will need more space in between these things. So I think the museum is gonna affect it in this way. There's gonna be more space, there should be more space for other people, and the spaces should be used in a democratized way. So let's talk about, if you think about the kids atelier, the library, the conference room, maybe this is all needs to be planned, like you said, time-based. Time is gonna change. So time planning is maybe gonna be very important part of the museum. Maybe nighttime events, there are late night visits, like, I don't know, 12 a.m. in the morning.
No, I agree with you. It's a kind of discussion we have in Italy in this moment about how to do exhibition in the next future. Mm-hmm. Probably the point will be less exhibition, but with a longer time of use. So, yeah. And then in a longer time, you can transform the exhibition in a real workshop where you multiply the chances to do something inside. So instead of having a Raphael exhibition of 2 months, you have a Raphael exhibition of 6 months. So you have probably less events, but more rooted, more powerful, more used by a community. So we could switch from the idea of consumption to the idea of a different kind of horizontal collective experience, which very interesting, where you can mix physicality and digitality in a totally different way. The last 2 months has been an amazing upgrade from the technological point of view for all humanity, because we get used to this kind of connection. So for us now, it's normal to give an appointment for a Zoom meeting instead of meeting each other. So I feel, for example, in my life that I will travel less, because if I have to go to Rome 4 hours straight to a meeting of 1 hour and then go back the same day is other 4 hours. So throwing away 8 hours for a meeting of 1 hour, now easily you can do, okay, let's have a Zoom meeting of 1 hour. You stay calm in your place, so you don't waste your time, no? So
the thing that go ahead. Yeah, the thing that I think the differentiator is what I call touch points.
Yeah.
And I think that there's going to be a greater appreciation for the touch points in our life. And I think it's very likely that, especially in the architectural world, people will look back and say, do you remember when we used to go to the office 5 days a week? Why did we do that? And we'll realize that maybe we only need to go to the office 3 days a week, or even 2 days a week. But we need to make sure that those touch points are meaningful. Same thing with clients. To your point, Luca, maybe you don't go for that meeting all the time, but then when you do go, it's an important touch point. Yeah. And it's celebrated and appreciated in a different way. And I think that's going to be true with the way we design our communities, physically design them. I think that the time is a very important factor that we've talked about a few times today, that how we program the use of these is part of that touch point. Touch point in terms of programming, when are we going to be meeting together? And if you think about it, it's been something that's been a great adjustment for all of us. We had a lot of spontaneity in our office, but now we have our touch points are not physical touch points. They might be virtual touch points, or they're not, they're like this, they're like Zoom, but you have to schedule them and you need to coordinate those and appreciate those. And I think the water level will find its, a comfortable medium point. Right now, we're in the state where I don't know how it is for you guys, but I'm going almost crazy at how many meetings,
Yeah.
how many Zoom meetings. I think that we'll appreciate and we'll eventually find the right amount that makes sense, even in this transition with COVID. But this idea of touch points is going to go beyond this particular moment in terms of a greater appreciation for when we get together with other people.
I agree with you. Well, the challenge will be not to empty our cities, not to, to find a good balance.
It might allow some of the things in the transition of less density day to day. I think we'll still have events where there are large gatherings. That's a different kind of touch point, but maybe those become more special, more appreciated.
It's fun because architects by nature is an optimistic animal. So it's we always look at the positive point of view. Is there any other question that because it's more than 1 hour, and our friends told us that we have a kind of sort of time limit, since we enjoy a lot talking each other, but I think that if there's somebody want to give other questions, we are here. Instead, we can continue in our day in our physical presence in 3 different continents. Because in this moment, Alper is in Asia, I'm in Europe, and you are in US, so in America. So we are touching 3 different continents in one single webinar.
Yes.
Luca, I think everybody's expecting a magical solution from the architects to make the whole world immediately livable again.
Well,
without losing our habits, but that's not gonna happen, I think.
Not in a short time. Not in a short time. We are very, architects are magic, are very strong visionary, but you have to give them good time to be real, to become real. So now it's time to reflect and work and listen, and to listen reality. Reality, as usual, is more advanced than anything else. So we have to listen and to learn. In the meantime, to produce vision that are reliable for those kind of realities, I think.
I think there will be a huge progress in favor of the digital world, which you already mentioned. Exhibitions will be, yes, part of it. Now I see that there are some already events that on digital exhibitions. I agree with what you said. So we have to try to get used to new norms that's going to affect all our lives. Public spaces will be redefined, as you mentioned. And I wonder what the high rises will do in New York.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in the elevator with so many people without, having a lot of.
It's interesting. It's interesting because after 9/11, we had a lot of clients that said, "Are we going to design skyscrapers again?" And then the next 5 years was the biggest boom of skyscrapers in the world ever. And the same thing, would people live in New York City ever again? And we had one of the biggest explosions or increases of people living in Manhattan, and especially in Lower Manhattan. I think what we're going to find is that people are going to find the level of comfort. And again, as said earlier, I think we're going to have a little bit of more of a lens of adaptability in our designs, perhaps thinking about those spaces that I was talking about, not so much within the building, but getting into the building. That transition space is going to be probably one of the most important, that transition space on the street. That's going to be the heart of what a lot of designers are going to be focused on. And it's not just the designers, like Luca, Alper, and myself, but the designers are going to be the frontline people that are adapting in real time, that are making adjustments in real time. And if we are open to seeing their clever solutions, I think we can take and build upon those. And that's probably the solution, is to keep our eyes open.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that I don't know what everyone says, but I think it's time to end up. Is it true?
Yes. So
Yeah.
I would like to thank all of you, Luca, as being the moderator and giving us the topic. And Craig, thank you for joining us from New York. I know it's a little bit, it was early for you, but you are an early bird. Alper, I also thank you for your contributions and joining us. To me, it was very informative and very efficient indeed. As you mentioned, Luca, we became more productive and efficient. We don't spend time just on the traffic, but my thoughts is also that maybe people will start working with less hours as being so efficient, because you are not wasting time. So there's only a certain amount of hours where you can totally focus on certain things. And if that is limited, then you may have some extra time for yourself, for your family, where we learned a lot from this COVID-19. Maybe thanks to COVID-19. That it let us know what the value of the family and the friends are. So thanks to all of you for joining us.
Teşekkürler. Teşekkürler.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving chance to.
It's my pleasure.
Nice people together. It was always fun. It's always fun to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
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 Ciao.
Keep safe. Bye-bye.